Hi Year 11s. So we're going to take this opportunity while you guys are doing some mocks to try something a little bit different. So I know some of you can make online lessons but others can't. So I'm recording this lesson for you. Obviously I want you to work your way through and answer questions as best as possible, and then we'll get some feedback afterwards. Okay, so just a bit of preparation stuff. Write this down in your book. We're doing some paper 3 recap, just going through your revision guide. So you'll need to get your paper 3 revision guide that I sent through to you. Hopefully you've got that by now. And we're going to start off with 2 recap questions from previous lessons. I'll give you a minute to get your stuff and get ready with that. Pause the video and then we'll crack on with some questions. So first question is, explain how nutrients are lost from the nutrient cycle. So think about that nutrient cycle. Really important that we have a really good understanding of the nutrient cycle and the processes. So think about the stores, think about the transfers. Where do we get our nutrient loss and why? Okay, so we're explaining, giving a bit of detail in there. And your second question is what we covered last lesson. So describe sites as a conservation strategy. So you're going to think about what sites means and how does it work as a strategy. So I'll give you a couple of minutes, pause the video there, a couple of minutes to answer those questions, and then we'll go through the answers. Okay, so hopefully by now you've written your answers. I just want you to check through your answers to make sure you're happy with them. So as a model answer, I've said nutrients are lost in 2 ways. Firstly, through leaching, which is where nutrients are lost from the soil as a result of rainfall or irrigation. So that water is running through the soils, draining out the nutrients, and it can be lost from that particular biome or that particular area. The second is through runoff, so water running along the top of the soils and can take away the leaf litter and the nutrients from those, so they can be washed away into rivers. So 2 main ways. We've got leaching and runoff. CITES, as we discussed last lesson, stands for Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. It aims to stop the trade of rare species of animals so that they are protected. Okay, so we want to protect those animals, and as I said, it's not just animals but also plants, making sure that they're protected too. Okay, so getting on with the lesson, what I'd like you to do just to start off with is to use this video link down below. It's a really fantastic introduction to the rainforest and different parts of the rainforest that we've looked at. So recapping things about location and so on. So it's about 5 minutes long. So pause this video, load up the YouTube link, which I'll send along with this video. And then take notes in your books about things like location, about the climate, adaptations, and forest structure. They're all really well discussed in this video, and it gives a nice overview which we'll come back to during this lesson. So pause your video from me and go and watch your YouTube video from BBC Teach. Okay, so now looking at your paper 3 workbook, so the first thing that we ask you to do is to describe the distribution of tropical rainforest. You should be fairly confident at doing this, and I've given you some directions on that in the booklet. So we want to think about lines of latitude, because that's a really important part of why it is the way it is, so why its climate is like that, and why there's so much biodiversity. All of those link to its location, so you should feel confident about that. So mentioning lines of latitude like the tropics, the equator obviously is important. Might mention a few countries and continents that they're in, because obviously the rainforest goes across a variety of different locations, not just in Brazil. So in your workbook, describe the distribution of the tropical rainforest. So answering your first question. Well done. Okay, so now we're going to look at our second task, and this is think about the climate of the Amazon. So we're going to start off again by thinking about what the climate is like, and then we're going to think about why it is the way it is. As always with the climate, we want you guys to think about a PQE paragraph. Okay, so pattern, what's the general things that you notice about the temperature and the precipitation, so talk about the climate over the course of the year. Then we want you to quantify it. The examiners want to see that you're giving statistics and that you can read these graphs. So obviously we think about temperature is our line graph and rainfall is the bar graph. So remember I talked about buckets. So our buckets of collecting rainfall, and those are bar graphs. Just an easy way to remember. And then any exceptions, things that don't quite fit in with that pattern. So you might mention how much rainfall there is during the year, but then you might point out that there are some months where that's lower. Be careful on this graph. This graph is a bit of a trick one in that the range of temperature is actually very, very small, even though it looks like there's a significant change. You know, it ranges between 26 and 28 degrees, so that's something to be careful about. Give you a minute to do that question. Pause the video and then move on to the next one. Okay, so our challenge question says, okay, now that you've got the climate, we want to think about why is it here. Okay, so if we look at this, well, I think they're amazing maps. If we look at this map, it shows you one of the reasons. So it shows you temperatures across the world, and we can see along the equator, where my red line is, we can see that some of the warmest temperatures are around the equator. Okay, so we're thinking about the climate. Well, that's an important part of why the climate is the way it is. We can then look further at this and think about the climate as well. So along the equator we've also got quite heavy levels of rainfall. So again, if we look through Brazil, there's heavy area of rains, and then through Indonesia and so on. Okay, so thinking about those two things, we want to be able to try and explain why the climate is the way it is. And we talk about convectional rainfall. This is something, again, that you guys should feel fairly familiar with, and we'll go through in a second. Just as a quick reminder, you might remember our favourite thing, air circulation models. Well, that's part of the reason why the climate is the way it is. So we'll go back to thinking about convectional rainfall. And convectional rainfall is this process where we get lots of heavy rainfall at the equator. So using the diagram, I want you to think about how you could describe that. I've got a set of keywords along the side there, and I want you to either sketch down the diagram that you can see on your right and add some annotations, or if you'd rather just write down a full paragraph, that would work too. So pause your video and describe the process of convectional rainfall. Okay, so obviously in your answer you should have talked about radiation from the sun being quite intense at the equator, and what that means is that the air above the earth is being heated. Okay, and as that heat warms up, it rises. Okay, so the air is rising at the equator more than in other areas because it's getting that direct radiation from the sun. So the air is rising, and then as the air rises, we know that it cools and condenses. Okay, when we get heavy condensation, we also get heavy rainfall. Okay, so all of those things sort of tie in together. We also mentioned the other day about how trees release water. So a big part of where the water comes from is through transpiration of the trees and evaporation of their leaves. Okay, so that contributes a lot to the convectional rainfall. So you might mention those two things in your answer. I've written here a model answer for you guys so that you can see where you would get the marks. So radiation from the sun heats up the land. As air warms, it rises. So we need to have that in our answer, the fact that the warm air rises. Water droplets from transpiration and previous downfall also evaporate and rise. When the warm air reaches higher altitude, It condenses due to the cooler temperatures. We know that at high altitudes it's much cooler, and so we get higher levels of condensation. This causes rain clouds to form and eventually leads to heavy rain, usually in the afternoon. Okay, so now that we've understood the climate of the Amazon and rainforest in general, we can think about how that climate affects what goes on within the biome. Okay, so one of the things that's affected by the climate is the forest structure. Okay, it's not one mass of trees exactly the same. Okay, there's lots of different levels. We call it stratified layers within the rainforest, and you guys need to have an idea about the rainforest structure. So from the video that you saw earlier, and you might want to load that up again and have another look, and the information in your booklet, I want you to annotate each of the different layers. So what's going on in the emergent layer? What are the kind of animals that you can see? What are the plants like? And have also think about why they are the way they are. Okay, so why is it that trees are trying to get much taller? Why is it that there might be more animals in the canopy layer, and so on? Okay, so really have a think about some detailed annotations in your booklet. But the video itself earlier is really fantastic for that, so try to get some notes from that. So pause this video and complete your task there. Now that you've done your annotations, you should have a good understanding of what's going on in these different layers, but we want you to practice a bit of an exam question. So the question is, explain 2 ways in which plants and animals are adapted to the conditions that occur in the rainforest. So we want to think about what's actually going on in terms of the climate, in terms of what that structure is like, and why do certain animals live in certain areas. So you can use the information here on this slide in your book, or sorry, in your workbooks, to be able to use and answer this question. Okay, so explain 2 ways in which plants and animals are adapted to the conditions that occur in the rainforest. Really want you to think about that explaining idea. So pause your answer, pause your video, and then on the next slide I'll give you a partial model answer. So hopefully you guys have had a good go at this question, but just so that you feel a bit more confident, I've done a sort of an example paragraph. So I've done epiphytes, which I think are amazing plants. They don't need any sort of soil as such. They don't need to be in the ground like most of our plants do. They actually live in the trees themselves. So epiphytes are adapted to the canopy. So you're mentioning that specific layer of the rainforest. They get their nutrients from air and water. Okay, so within the trees themselves, they attach themselves and get them from those. And this allows them to be at the top of the trees in the canopy so that they can access the sunlight. Okay, so you're really explaining why they are there and what the adaptations are. So you guys might do the similar sort of thing, thinking about some of the other adaptations. So choosing maybe a plant, or sorry, an animal as a kind of differentiator. Okay, so the next thing we want you to do in the booklet is think about the nutrient cycle. So important that you guys have a good understanding of what's going on with the nutrient cycle. And it may sound boring as an initial thing, but it is the core, it is the kind of essence of these biomes, what's happening between all of these different parts, what's happening from the plants to the litter and to the soil, and all of it revolves around this. So we looked at the location, and we know that location affects the climate. Well, the climate affects the levels of biodiversity, and that biodiversity affects the nutrients, so they're all affecting each other. The nutrients then come back and they affect the levels of biodiversity. We talked about the biodiversity earlier affecting the climate. Okay, and so if there's that loss of trees, then we lose well, that has an impact on the climate. So all of these things are interdependent. We want you to think about that, and that's the kind of the really important message within this unit, is because of this interdependence, we can't sort of destroy certain parts of it. It's very difficult for it to recover. So in your booklets, we're asking you to first describe the tropical rainforest nutrient cycle. So think about the sizes of these stores, so the biomass, the